Our dear Lord, we bless your name, we glorify your name. We thank you, Lord, for bringing us here today together. We ask you to bless our gathering, bless Dr. Christine and all her work and efforts. We ask you to give us open heart and mind to learn and receive the information for the benefit of ourselves and the benefit of the service. We ask you this in your name and through the intercession of Saint Mary and all the saints. We ask you to hear us. We pray, thank you, say, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. Because Jesus our Lord, thine the kingdom, power, and glory forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. It's my pleasure and my honor to present you Dr. Chrsitine Agaibi, MA, PhD candidate. And of course, she is no stranger to you all because we heard her lectures before. She's outpatient therapist, family ministry program faculty, past visiting resilience scholar, association leadership, professional speaker on resilience, positive psychology, mental health, and intersection of psychology and religion/spirituality. She's been doing that for 2 decades. She has 2 decades of experience in the field of mental health, positive psychology, and well-being. She is skilled in individual and group therapy, teaching, and public speaking. And there's many, many more to say about Dr. Chrsitine. I'm really very impressed, and I'm really very honored to have you with us, Dr. Chrsitine. God bless you, and welcome to our servants meeting.
Thank you, Buddha.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Buddha, for having me, for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it. Dr. Hani asked me to talk today about depression, anxiety, suicide, and resilience. So that's what we'll talk about today. I'm going to share my screen. If I can do that, give me 1 second. Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
I won't be able to see your hands raised or any questions, but if you need to ask a question that's pressing, please unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, we'll keep the questions till the end. 1 second. I'm trying to.
Also, there
we go.
How many? 30?
Okay. So my contact information is here, and it'll be at the last screen as well if you need to reach out to me with questions afterwards as well. But again, if you need to ask a question during, please feel free to do that. So again, today we're going to be talking about depression, anxiety, and self-harm or suicidality that you may be experiencing in your service, and how to manage those things with resilience and with resources and tools. So let me see here. So obviously many times, especially during this time of COVID, when things have been really difficult and we're staying home a lot and things are very stressful, people are going through a lot of different stresses during this time, more than ever before probably. We felt like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. We know that adversity is part of life, but again, during this challenging time of the pandemic, it's been even more challenging to interact with family members, to deal with job losses, to deal with illnesses, to deal with all the stressors that have come with the last year and a half or so. So many times we may have felt like this. And stresses come from all different kinds of things: feeling overworked, relationship issues, financial issues, and even though we may not be experiencing traffic, but this last picture is to kind of indicate that we may have stressors from everyday things that we're experiencing, again, even more so with COVID. Stress is any time the body has a demand placed upon it mental or physical demand. And we can either adjust to it and do well because our coping skills are good, and we'll learn some coping skills today, or we can maladjust to things and inappropriately react to certain situations. And when we have adolescents and kids that we're working with, they have things on top of it like finals, like exams, like trying to deal with Zoom and all the issues that come with that. And their schooling, they're not seeing their friends, their classmates on a regular basis. So there's a lot of impact that is being put on us nowadays. And so we have to learn how to deal with those things. Stress can be beneficial, and I've probably shown this slide before in some of my other talks, but stress can actually be healthy and beneficial in the green and kind of yellow zone of this chart. So imagine if you have a presentation for work or you have a test at the end of the week. Motivation can come from the stress to help you to study or to prepare for your meeting. And so that helps you to stay focused and motivated. And there's this like healthy tension that keeps you going. However, stress can also be very unbeneficial if it is too much, or if your coping mechanisms are compromised while you're trying to deal with the stressor. In those ends, you can even get sick or fatigued or distressed or have disease, burnout, panic, and anxiety, and some of the things that we'll talk about today with depression and anxiety. So we don't want to be in the orange or red zone of stress. We want to be in the yellow or the green zone of stress if we can. And so with kids, sometimes we say that kids can't get stressed. They're too young. They don't have too much things that they're experiencing, so they're not going to feel stress. Or we say that stress comes from bad parenting. For saying that children don't experience stress, they may experience it differently than adults, but they will also experience stress. We can say that stress comes from bad parenting, but again, that is a myth, because kids that have great parents will also experience stress simply from the things around them in their lives that they may experience. If they don't talk about stress, we say that it will just go away on its own. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Stress will build and build and build every time we kind of push it under the rug and hope it'll go away. And so we need to talk about it so it does not accumulate. The more that we talk about it as it comes, the more we're able to deal with it. We also say that sometimes children can't have stress because their stresses will be forgotten easily. Again, if you build up on that stress, it'll accumulate with time and cause even more stress. Sometimes we can say that we shouldn't experience stress if we have faith. And again, that's a myth, because stresses are talked about in the Bible with David the prophet, with Solomon, and even with Jesus when he was in Gethsemane. You could see that there were situations of stress there. So everybody experiences stress, but we shouldn't say that we shouldn't worry about it just because everybody experiences stress. There are times where stress is very experienced highly, and we need to deal with it so that we can focus on how to fix those situations and have solutions, rather than just, again, brush it under the rug and not deal with it. We can have bodily signs of stress, feeling signs of stress, behavioral signs of stress, and thinking signs of stress. And in your students, these are things to kind of look out for. And here are some examples of things that you can look out for to see if they're actually feeling distress or if it's something that they can handle with time. So with bodily things, you may get a lot of bodily issues that they can kind of complain with, because it's easier to complain about bodily things like a headache or a stomach ache or a skin irritation, rather than say I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious. You may see that their thinking is muddled, they're really worried about something, they're indecisive, or they make hasty and impulsive decisions, or they can have a loss of confidence, depression, alienation from other people. They can be irritable. They can be accident prone. If they're adults, they can lose things like appetite and things like that. Or they can even involve themselves in substances. And the point of all of this is that when people are stressed, they have these distorted messages that play in their mind about how shameful they are, or unimportant they are, or broken, or alone, or nobody's going to want to interact with them at all. And the messages in their mind are distorted. Obviously, as Christians, we know that we are loved. We know that God is there for us. He has a purpose for us. But the messages in our mind get distorted when people are stressed and then become depressed and become anxious. And so on the inside, they may look like this guy in the picture on the left. In their mind, they're distressed and sad and anxious and depressed. And on the outside, they may show us that they're happy and that there's nothing wrong. The story I want to focus on from the Bible is from the fifth Sunday of Lent, of the man that was paralyzed for 38 years. And we all know this story, so I won't read it to you, but you can find it in the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. And so he was a paralyzed man for 38 years. And if you know, in the beginning of the story, people would try to help him into the pool so that he could be healed. But after a time, those people stopped helping him, and somebody would always jump into the pool before him to be healed. Eventually, obviously, we know the story that Jesus healed him. And the usual conversation that we focus on the paralyzed man is his repentance. You've been made well, sin no more, lest something else comes upon you. We talk about the cleansing with the water and what it means to have water that cleanses us. We also talk about the healing on the Sabbath. But the things that we don't focus about sometimes in some of these emotional stories is what his emotions must have been like. Imagine being paralyzed for 38 years, not a year or two, but 38 years. Imagine being alone in that, and that he is kind of discarded by society, discarded by his friends and family. No one is there to help him. He's being left alone. Imagine that you see other people being helped, but you're not being helped yourself. Other people are being healed, but you're not being healed yourself. So imagine the impact that that would have on his mind, on his psyche, on his psychological makeup, though it is not often discussed. And so there's, sometimes we feel this kind of despair, this kind of hopelessness, this kind of helplessness, this kind of depression. And so imagine his emotions in this situation and in other situations that your students may go through or that you may go through yourself. And his story is not isolated. There are other stories in the Bible. Job, imagine his feelings when he was diseased and lost his home and lost his children, or Jacob when he wrestled with God, or Joseph when he was sold into slavery and was falsely accused and imprisoned, or Moses when he wandered the desert for 40 years, or Joshua leading the nation after Moses, or Naomi and Ruth losing their husbands and having to figure out how to deal with that situation, or Esther potentially losing her own life and her people's life. And St. Paul talked to us about being hard pressed on every side, that we are not perplexed, that we are in despair, but we are not broken down. So this tells us that adversity is a very normal part of life, that everybody has experienced it. Adversity has been around for centuries. Since biblical times, we're not alone when we feel adversity. God is always with us during this adversity, but he has given us the strength to deal with the adversity, and that does not have to break us. And so by the end of this talk, after we've talked about the mental health piece, we'll talk about how to be resilient and how to help our students be more resilient. So the prevalence of mental health, it's actually very common. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in the United States, or almost 44 million people, have experienced mental illness in any given year. And approximately 1 in 25 adults experience a serious mental illness that interferes with their life or with their skills or with their jobs or their schooling. And again, it's not just for adults. So when we have these myths that youth cannot experience stress, statistics show us that between the ages of 13 and 18, 1 in 5 youth will also experience some sort of mental health disorder. In the past year alone, there has been about 6.9% of US adults, or 16 million, with major depressive episode, and anxiety disorder about 18.1%. And specifically, if somebody's gone through some serious trauma, again, this past year of the pandemic has been even more and higher with these numbers. We don't have those statistics out quite yet, but the mental health issues have been even higher in this past year. And again, we can't say that youth are immune. I work in 2 clinics. One of them is just for children and adolescents, children as young as 5. And the other clinic I work in is in all ages. So again, we see people that are very, very young dealing with some of these issues, but also adults and adolescents as well. The way we want to focus on things is to identify the behaviors that they're experiencing. Everybody experiences depression and anxiety from time to time, but we want to see if this is a clinical type of issue or not. And the things that we need to focus on the most is, has the frequency of their depression increased? Obviously, if somebody's going through a hard time, you would expect them to be depressed at times, but is the frequency of it increased? Has it increased more and more over time? Or is it the same amount that they've always had? Has the intensity of it increased as well? If they used to describe it, their depression as a 1 or 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, and now it's like a 7 or 8, it's time to pay attention and maybe get some help. And how long the duration? Again, everybody experiences some dips in their their ups and downs, and they're feeling down at times, if they've had a loss, if they've had a job loss, or a person passed away, or things like that that happen. But is the duration of this taking too long? Is it beyond a significant period of time where they can't deal with it on their own for a significant period of time? So the frequency of it, the intensity of it, and the duration of it is really key. We also want to see if they're isolating and withdrawing, especially now, again, with COVID, when we're physically distancing. Are they isolating from people completely? Are they not talking to friends and family on the phone? Are they not FaceTiming people? Things like that. We want to pay attention to those kinds of things. We also want to see if anybody's been acting out or destructive in their behavior. Sometimes being acting out or destructive in their behavior is just a way to release all that stress and that tension. But if this is, again, excessive, if it's increasing in frequency, intensity, and duration, it's something to look at. If there's been an increase in dramatic and erratic behaviors, if there is substance use and they're not tolerating, they used to do it a little bit of times, but now they're doing the substance use all the time. If they have difficulty functioning, or if they have a recent and cumulative amount of life experiences, then that is something that we need to look at as well. Mental disorders are anything that cause significant disorganization of the person, of their mind, of their emotions, of their psychological makeup. And if the depression or anxiety, again, has increased in terms of its frequency, intensity, and duration, it's not something that somebody can just snap out of. You just tell them that, snap out of it. You got to stop being depressed. It doesn't work that way. If it's something that they can't snap out of, it is more than likely a mental condition that needs to be looked at. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of lack of faith. It is not a flaw. And it's not just something that you can say, well, try harder and then you'll feel better. Individuals in this case, they need treatment. They need to be talked to a psychologist or a therapist, and they sometimes may even need medication to help them to deal with these things. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Depression is quite common. About 121 million people across the world have depression, in every country, in every culture. So again, it's not an issue of having a different culture or a different faith background. People all across the world can experience depression. Depression, again, affects at least 1 in every 10 Americans. And some of them have symptoms and they seek treatment. But the number of patients that are diagnosed with depression increased by approximately 20% every year. And again, we don't have the COVID statistics yet of depression and anxiety, but I'm sure these numbers have increased in the last year with all the illness and the job loss and all the stresses that we have been experiencing. Depression can be caused by numbers of things. Obviously, again, the numbers are not out for COVID, but things like obesity or heart disease or an illness of some sort. It can affect sleep. So sleep can cause depression and can be a symptom of depression as well. A lack of access to medical care, a decrease in education or attending work can also be affected by depression. People that have obviously experienced familial issues, or if they've been unemployed, and again, these numbers probably increased last year. These are all things that are related to depression as well. Depression is generally higher for women. 1 in 10 women experience some sort of depression, specifically sometimes after they've had a baby or after they've had a major life change. And so you want to look at people that have experienced issues within their family that may cause depression as well. While the ages here listed as the highest are 45 to 64, again, we see patients as young as 5 and older from there. So it's not just necessarily to a certain age group or a certain gender or a certain race or culture. So with adolescents, these statistics are a little older, but again, 3.1 million adolescents have had at least one major depressive episode in their lifetime. Again, these numbers are going to be higher now with the situation in the last year. But this is just to show statistics that adolescents and even young children can experience depression. So here are some examples of what people will experience with depression. Again, everybody gets sad, everybody gets depressed from time to time. But if they can't bounce back from it within about a week or two, that's when we start looking into trying to get them some more help. So we look for things like low energy or fatigue, We look for things like self-esteem. Appetite can increase or decrease. Sleep can increase or decrease. People can feel hopeless. People can feel worthless or guilty. People can be diminished in their things that they used to be interested in. Maybe they liked a certain sport or a certain book that they like to read or something like that, and now they don't want to do those things anymore. So things that they used to enjoy, they don't enjoy anymore. And they can feel just slowed down and sluggish, like they can't get out of bed, they can't walk. So there again is some physical symptoms that may come up, even though this is a psychological issue. To recognize depression, again, we want to look and see if somebody has had this issue for greater than 2 weeks, occurring almost every day. So as short as 2 weeks, if somebody is not kind of bouncing back from whatever they're dealing with, that could be a sign of clinical depression. Symptoms of depression can again be symptoms of depressed mood, feeling sad or empty or hopeless more days than not. They can lose interest in activities that they once enjoyed. Again, sleeping difficulties, appetite issues. If they're in school, their grades would drop significantly, feeling a sense of worthlessness or guilt or shame, or being unable to concentrate, and then thoughts of death or suicide. We'll talk about that more in a minute. People can also have comorbidity, and we often see people with drug addictions and drug and alcohol issues. And I know we've talked about drug and alcohol issues specifically in the past. But specifically, when there are two or more disorders occurring at the same time, you will see sometimes depression or anxiety connecting with a drug addiction, because people are trying to self-medicate and get rid of those negative feelings that they're feeling. So they'll start using substances. So oftentimes we will see both of those things together. But a drug addiction is also a mental illness because it changes the structure of the brain and the sense of need that it has. So with mood and anxiety disorders, they will likely suffer this issue as well as the mood disorder itself. For females, we said depression is higher, but for substance abuse, males are higher. So anxiety is the other thing that goes also hand in hand with depression. Anxiety symptoms, again, everybody can feel anxious from time to time. Let's say you have a big meeting coming up, or a big presentation, or a big test. Of course, you're going to feel nervous and anxious about this. But with anxiety, those symptoms are not easily turned off. And people are constantly worried about things. You may feel a sense of dizziness or tingling, or chronic fatigue, or lightheadedness, or headaches. And sometimes, as you can see on the picture on the right there is some overlap between the depression symptoms, like sadness and irritability and restlessness and excessive worry, but also they kind of overlap with the anxiety symptoms that are in the blue there. And so again, sometimes you will see a lot of times that people are diagnosed with both an anxiety disorder and a depression type of episode. And again, there's an overlap between those two sometimes. Anxiety statistics, again, it occurs in adolescence as young as age 6. Symptoms can appear that early. And you can see it sometimes in kids with biting things, biting pencils, biting their nails, things like that. But it's excessive worry that cannot be turned off. And so if you want to look at everyday anxiety versus an anxiety disorder, I'll just read the first one as an example. Let's say somebody is worried about landing a job, or a romantic breakup, or about paying bills. But a person with an anxiety disorder, their worry is excessive. They are unable to turn it off. And the key in any of these disorders is that it affects their daily functioning. They are unable to focus on what they need to focus on, and unable to function in the ways that they would day to day. So they don't want to go to work, they don't want to go to school, they don't want to do the activities that they normally would do. It would maybe even cause them to avoid social situations or things altogether, because they're fearful they're going to be either humiliated or judged, or feeling in a certain way. So they may also have a sense of a panic attack, where they have physical symptoms that go along with their anxiety and their worry. So they would have shortness of breath, their heart's beating too fast, they may start sweating profusely, and they're unable to focus in on a certain situation. So again, anxiety is very similar to something that you may experience day to day, but if it's something that starts affecting functioning, your social engagements, your social interactions, your ability to do your job or go to school, look for those things in the kids that you're working with as well. And sometimes if they're having a panic attack, they can't even speak, because they're so overwhelmed by the emotion of anxiety that they're unable to speak even. So we may see that sometimes as well. So here's some examples of some specific anxiety disorders. The generalized anxiety disorder is kind of what I was just describing, is that they can't turn it off. It's an excessive sense of worry, what we would basically feel day to day from having to pay a bill or having a meeting coming up or having a test that we have to take, to not being able to turn that worry feeling off ever. Again, a panic disorder has some physical symptoms that go along with it. Younger children may experience some separation anxiety, especially when they're not willing to separate from a caregiver. So if they're really close to their parents, they don't want to separate from their parents. We see this usually in younger children. Some people may have a social phobia where they don't want to interact with other people or may feel a sense of humiliation and shame. And there's also some specific phobias related to some specific fears. Phobias like related to spiders, let's say, or some fear of heights or fear of airplanes or something like that. People may also have post-traumatic stress disorder related to a specific trauma, and we can spend an entire lecture just on post-traumatic stress disorder, or any one of these really. But post-traumatic stress disorder is when somebody has experienced a real or perceived threat to their lives or to somebody else's life, and they start having flashbacks and nightmares and things like that that are related. So look for those symptoms of anxiety. Again, if it's affecting their functioning, that is something to look for. Here are some specific symptoms, and I'll leave this up for a minute, that you can look for in each of these specific disorders we just talked about. And you can see there's some physical symptoms in this, again, some body symptoms, some thinking symptoms, and symptoms that really affect people's functioning because the frequency, intensity, and duration of it has really affected them. So usually when people interact some sort of stressor, they can do one of four things. At least this is what the research shows us. They can either succumb and their functioning is completely impaired and they're unable to function anymore. Hopefully we do not reach this stage, but with help, they can actually come back from that as well. They can survive and continue to function, but they're just functioning with or without impairment, but they're at a very basic baseline level. They're not thriving. They're not doing the best that they can. They're at a very, very basic level. People can also dip with a stressor, with a difficulty, with a problem. They can fall below their baseline and then just come back up to baseline where they were and stay there. Hopefully with treatment and with talking with professionals and with our priests and with our servants and things like that, and with family, we can thrive and prosper beyond our original level of functioning. So hopefully if we have a dip below the baseline, we can come back from that and become stronger than ever before. Because at some point, all of us have experienced some sort of threat to our wellness. It could be something that is transient, really short term. Hopefully with COVID, things are short term, but for some people, it may be really chronic and long term. Sometimes the effects of what has happened in this last year could be long term. And so we really want to achieve resilience to our stressors. And research shows that one of the ways that we can do that is through our spirituality, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But we want to be achieving resilience in terms of our stressors. In terms of suicide risk, and sometimes this comes up in our service as well, we want to consider many different factors. We want to consider the mental health of that person that is talking to you about this, any trauma or a brain injury that they may have experienced, any physical or health conditions. So these things all increase the risk of potential suicide risk. There may be also environmental factors, like if they have access to lethal means, if they are prolonged in their stress, if they've had a significant amount of stressful life events, even beyond COVID. Again, the more cumulative stressors they have, the more likely this could happen. If they've been exposed to another person's suicide, and there was a show on Netflix a couple of years ago where all of the teenagers were watching, that was a show that put people at a lot of risk because it didn't give solutions. It just kind of sensationalized the events surrounding suicide. So it's important to know if they're watching those kinds of shows, if they know somebody at their school who's attempted suicide, or someone that they know, that increases their risks as well. Also, if they've had previous attempts, that increases their risk. Again, if they have family history of attempts or completed suicides, then that can increase their risk. And if they've had things like childhood abuse or neglect or trauma, or things associated now with the situation that we're in with COVID, those are all kind of flags to look for to see if this person is at risk. They will often talk about it, talk about hurting themselves or killing themselves. You may often see that they are feeling hopeless, if they have no purpose, if they feel like they're a burden to other people, if they feel like they're trapped. They may feel like this is their only way to escape their struggles and their stressors, and that they have this unbearable pain that they cannot get rid of. Those are the kinds of things to look forward for as situations that may be risk factors for talk of suicide. Some other behavioral signs that somebody may see is if they have an increased use of substance use or a start of using substances. If they're looking for other ways, they're searching online for methods and things like that. Those are all things that we should be aware of. If they used to be heavily involved in activities in church, in sports, and whatever, but now they're withdrawing from those activities, they're separating from friends and family. If they're not talking to people as much as they used to, sleeping not as much, if they're not being visited or called as much, if they start to give away their possessions, if they're becoming more aggressive or sleeping too much. These are all signs that we should be paying attention and at least to investigate and to ask questions. We also should look at things like mood, if they're depressed, if they're anxious, if they've lost interest in things, if they're irritable, if they feel a sense of humiliation or shame, if they've been angered in some way, if they have a sudden improvement, because sometimes people will be really depressed and then they come up with a decision of what they're going to do, and that gives them a sense of relief. So we want to look for if they were, depressed for some time, but now suddenly feeling relief. That could be a sign that something is wrong as well. And again, this is quite common, more common than we think, especially with this past year of the pandemic. But these statistics are a little bit older now, from about 4 or 5 years ago or so. But it was about 13.4 suicides per 100,000 people. Firearms are one of the highest ways of doing for completing suicide, and that is usually for men. For women, they tend to use less violent means, but it's the 10th leading cause in the US of death, and that's again about 5 years ago or so. So it's again, there's statistics that show that there's a trend there, and again, we're waiting for newer numbers to come out with the pandemic in the last year. But it's common enough that we should know that it happens to both men and women, and that people die by suicide because of things like firearms and other means. But we should look into even seeing if those things are available to the youth that we serve with. So again, the numbers for youth in that same year, about 2016, was about 5,000 teens that had died by suicide, and that number had doubled, more even than higher than car accidents. And the increase we think is due to things like social media, to cyberbullying, to things happening 24 hours a day. These things used to happen in the schoolyard or at school, the bullying and the things like that. But with social media, that stuff is on their phone 24 hours a day. There's no time to turn it off. And their illnesses are untreated. The mental illness is untreated. Also with adolescents, they're experiencing a lot of difficulty due probably to puberty, to a lot of hormones. Their minds are not fully developed. And again, things like family history and substance abuse, and the environment that they're in can contribute as well. So what should I do? If you hear somebody talking about this, again, don't brush things under the rug. You have to take it seriously. You have to ask questions and listen. And don't be afraid. This is a common question that if I ask about it, I will give them ideas about what to do or how to do it, or give them ideas to research. That is not true. Research shows us that it is absolutely important to take it seriously, to ask questions, to listen, to trust your own gut feeling that maybe something is wrong, and to get help immediately. And it's not up to you to give the help unless you're a trained professional, but you can call this number, or they can text. They can text also to 741-741, or call the national helpline to get immediate resources to help you to deal with this situation. So that way, connect them to the resources, maybe take them to a crisis unit where a lot of people are afraid to go, but it's just meant to be a place to stabilize you and to give you a place to relax and calm down and get some immediate treatment until you can follow up with more outpatient care and things like that. So get the help immediately and take it seriously, and don't be afraid to ask questions. and then follow up after the fact. You also want to look at things, and I won't go through this in too much detail because of the time, but we want to look at people from a mind, body, and spiritual perspective. And this was a philosophy that was created by a psychiatrist named George Engel in 1977, because he didn't want to just approach things from a medical perspective and say, oh, this person has depression because of their genetics. That's very well likely true, but there also we have to look at their circumstances of their biology, their psychology, and as well as their social environment. Um, and so these things exist across a continuum, and it helps us to look at the person holistically. You want to see what kind of home these kids are coming from. What kind of struggles have they had in the last year? Did somebody lose their job and now they're struggling financially? Um, do you want to see that do they have areas where they can tap into some well-being? What is the history of that person's makeup? And again, do they have a family history of this? You want to look at things from all perspectives. If we're just looking at it from one perspective, we're not going to see this person holistically, nor understand how to deal with them holistically. Um, this is a hierarchy of needs that people have. And you want to see what kind of need is missing. So the first need that we have is something physiological. We all want basic needs, not want, but absolutely need things like water and sleep and food. And if they don't have those things, can we provide it for them in some way? We also want to provide for them a sense of safety. Do they have a roof over their head? Do they have a bed to sleep on? If they don't have those things, they may feel a sense of distress from that. Then do they have a sense of love and belonging? Do they have a family members that love them and care for them and support them through the struggles? Only then can they have a sense of self-respect, self-esteem, um, and strive to be the best that they can be. So look at your students again from a holistic perspective and see where they're actually lacking and where we can help. And how do they respond to adversity? Do they blame anybody for their problems? Do they see a sense of purpose in their struggles? Do they see that their struggles have a sense of purpose? Usually, people that have a sense of purpose can cope a little bit better with the struggles that they're facing. So, do they see their struggles with a sense of challenge or with a sense of despair? Do they see their struggles and feel hopeful, or do they feel a sense of discouragement? Do they find meaning again? Because people that have meaning tend to do a lot better. And did they respond to this situation by problem solving, or did they just give up? And do they feel a sense of strength or a sense of weakness? Obviously, people that are feeling challenged, hopeful, are able to problem solve, have a sense of meaning in their situation, tend to feel stronger and tend to feel like they have the ability to deal with things. From a spiritual perspective, we have talked a lot about adversity from a sin perspective, from a sense that it's teaching us something, that it's preparing us for something to show us God's faithfulness. But from a psychological perspective, again, and this is why we have to combine the two, we have to look at things that these people may have a predisposition genetically to depression or anxiety, that they have some basic need that needs to be met, like from that Maslow hierarchy that we just talked about, that they may have some environmental concerns or mental health issues in their family, or they may have experienced some sort of threat. But the adversity acts differently on every person. So even two brothers or two sisters in the same home may be experiencing the same stressors, and one may be more hopeful and one may be more discouraged and depressed. And so we have to have all of the perspectives of that biopsychosocial model on this person to understand each individual person that we're dealing with. The good news is that though adversity exists and depression exists and anxiety exists, we can bounce back. And that is actually what resilience is. Resilience is not the absence of stress or the absence of pain. We know that adversity is a part of life. Stress and struggle is a part of life. But just like this flower, you can still bloom even when everything around you is arid and dry and non-nurturing. And so resilience can be really complex. If this was an actual psychological or scientific talk, I would talk more about this model of resilience. But basically, resilience is it happens on a continuum. We're not going to be resilient overnight. This is a muscle to be built over time. And the more that we're able to deal with our coping skills and our struggles, the more we're able to bounce back from those stressors. So resilience in a brief meaning, but it's actually much more complex than this, is the ability to adapt and proceed successfully despite any kind of threatening or challenging situation. So even though they're going through all this struggle, there is a way to kind of come out of it and deal with it appropriately. I like to give this example sometimes, but again, in the interest of time, I'll just do it really briefly. Think of a stressor as a boiling pot of water. And if you put a carrot into it, that carrot will disintegrate. We obviously don't want to go into a stressor and fall apart and disintegrate. If you put an egg into it, that egg goes from soft and malleable on the inside to hard and not soft at all on the outside. So it becomes like very difficult to penetrate and to deal with. Obviously, we don't want to be that kind of person either. We don't want to be hardened on the outside or the inside once we've dealt with a stressor. But with coffee goes into the boiling water and kind of influences that boiling water and changes its aroma, and it becomes delicious and edible. So we want to be people that go into a stressor and come out of it able to change our environment and able to be more aromatic and pleasant as a result. And how we do that is to get treatment. We want to decrease stigma, because stigma is a big part of the reason that people do not get help. Help can come in the form of medication, and there's nothing wrong with medication. Again, it doesn't have to be permanent, but it's something that is a tool that helps us to kind of fix the chemicals in the brain, to get them to react appropriately to get us into a stable mood state. We also want to focus on things like nutrition and exercise, things like therapy, and things like social support or community support. Their lifestyle may have to change. If there's toxic people in their life or a toxic environment, that may have to change to help them to deal with the difficulty and the negativity that is in their life. We also want to minimize the stressors as much as we can. Again, if they need food assistance, or they need a better place to live, or they need one of those basic things in Maslow's hierarchy, we want to be able to help with that. And then, of course, there's going to be spiritual and psychological resilience as well. So again, the spirit, the mind, and the body work together to help us to get whole wellness from many different perspectives. And religion and spirituality has been shown to be really beneficial in our resilience. For example, it gives us a guideline of how to conduct ourselves, something to strive for. It gives us resilience. It gives us an idea of what is lawful and what is not, what is good and what is not. And research has shown that there is a negative correlation. So as religion and spirituality increase, things like suicide, substance use, risky behavior, and depression all decrease. And as religion and spirituality increase, we see a positive increase in mental health and physical health as well. The American Psychological Association showed ways for people to become more resilient. First and foremost is to make connections. And while we can't be physically near people nowadays, we want to physically distance, of course, but we can still communicate and have interactions with people through social media, through computers, through FaceTime. We have to make connections so that we don't feel so alone. We also want to avoid seeing any crisis as insurmountable. Oftentimes we will see a crisis and think that this is too big, I can't handle this, this is too much for me to deal with, and that becomes a problem as well. So we want to avoid seeing a crisis as insurmountable. Every problem has a solution. We just have to figure out what those solutions are with the help of others. We want to accept that change is a part of living and move towards our goals and take decisive actions and look for opportunities of self-discovery and meaning in that difficulty. We want to nurture a positive self-view, keep things in perspective, maintain a hopeful outlook, and take care of ourselves. We also want to promote resilience with our own personal stories. Everybody that is on this call, no matter how old or young, they have had some sort of struggle that they've been through and have been able to overcome it. So if we reflect on that story, if we reflect on that personal story and are trying to overcome that difficulty and deconstruct the memory and see how we've escaped from that vulnerability, then we can find a pattern of different ways of how to enhance our past resilience to use that situation in our story today. We also want to gather corroborating evidence from other people in case we don't know our own story of resilience well enough, or figuring out how we escaped from that situation in the past. And then we want to define this situation and find brainstorming ways to fit that story with today's situation. So kind of like this puzzle piece guy on the right. Take that story of your own personal resilience and figure out a way to tailor make it for your current story today so that you can function, so that you can be resilient, and anticipate how to deal with that situation as it comes. Some characteristics that you can enhance is not avoiding that problem. A lot of times, again, like I said, we try to put our heads in the sand and say, I'm just going to ignore it. They're teenagers or they're children. They don't have an issue that we should be dealing with, but that's not necessarily true. So just because they're young doesn't mean we could just brush it under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. Of course it exists and we have to deal with it. We also want to find ways to increase their self-esteem, maybe help them serve along with you or give them a sense of service and purpose in the church so that they can increase their self-esteem. The more they increase their self-esteem, the better off they will be in finding ways to be more resilient and to deal with that situation. We also want to encourage secure attachments. Good relationships have been shown to help people to master stress, to have a sense of self-esteem, to find solutions to their stressors, and then eventually to be more resilient. A lot of times people will feel a sense of guilt for the difficulties that they're dealing with, but we wanted to teach them, what have we learned from that situation that you've been in? Not to feel a sense of overwhelming guilt, because sometimes we will see these suicidal tendencies with guilt, with excessive guilt. I wish things would have been this way or with this way, but what can we learn from the situation that we're in? And research has also shown that people that have kind of positive emotions tend to have more problem solving skills and can deal with the difficulties that they're experiencing a lot easier than people that are thinking more negatively. So again, we want to help them reframe that situation. Is it really as impossible as you're saying that it is? Not minimizing their feelings, not minimizing how serious this is for them, but to help them to problem solve and again to create meaning out of that difficult situation and to focus on their strengths, not just their weaknesses and where they're having some difficulty. You also want to encourage them to talk to someone like in their family or friends, but specifically professionals that can help them to sort out their feelings. Usually they can sort out their feelings by understanding that feelings fall into at least 4 different categories, but then you can branch out from there for more complex emotions. But at least start with these 4 if they can't pinpoint what is hurting them or bothering them. People can be anxious or fearful, depressed or sad, angry or happy at the very least. And who should they talk to is someone that is warm, someone that is genuine, someone that can put themselves in their shoes, someone that is consistent with them, and someone that is patient. And the consistent piece is usually the most important, because what happens is that somebody will ask about somebody once or twice, and then in a week or so they drop off and they don't follow up. The follow up piece is really, really important, because these things, they don't just snap out of them overnight. They don't just get better with 1 or 2 nights away from that situation. I was just reading an article this morning about how burned out people are, and that we think if we just take a weekend off and walk away from it for 2 days, that will be enough. That's not enough. It's got to be a consistent pattern of finding self-care day to day to help them to walk out of that situation. So the consistency piece is really, really key. In order to be more resilient, research shows that people that are more have more gratitude, are more thankful. And I always bring up the Coptic Thanksgiving prayer in here, because it's in all situations, in all things, not just when things are good. But people that, and research, actually psychological research supports this. People that have gratitude tend to shift their focus. The focus on the negative doesn't disappear, but it helps them to focus that there are positive things in their life, that there are good things, that they have strengths, that they can use those strengths. Savoring their experiences is really important as well. Anytime you have a good experience, the more that you sit and focus on that good experience, even if it's a good cup of coffee today, or a good meal, or a good conversation with a friend, and you sit and focus on those good situations, you can almost bank them in your mind, like a banking system, and withdraw from it when things are negative. So it's really important to have positive emotions, savoring good experiences, have gratitude, examine your own story of resilience, and be altruistic and kind to others. We all have these character strengths. You can go on this VIA character website to help you figure out what your specific strengths are. Research has shown that people all over the world, no matter who they are, have these 24 character strengths in them in some level or another. So you have each one of these 24 inside of you in some level or another. It's just a matter of pulling them out and leaning on them a little bit, and using the kind of, there's going to be a quiz on there on the VIA character that you can take, like a survey, to help you to figure out which ones are your highest strengths. And from there, you can lean in on those strengths to help you to become more and more resilient. From a spiritual perspective, of course, we want to have a goal. We want to not be complacent, because complacency kind of is like the status quo kind of feeling. You always want to have a goal and focus on what's not working and work to fix it. You want to be balanced in your life. You want to accept the challenge of the situation, that it's temporary. Obviously, let God into your life and let him help you to deal with it. Make small leaps from yesterday. Don't try to take big leaps and try to fix everything all at once. But small goals, small leaps can help you to move from day to day. Of course, you don't want to give up. And of course, you want to pray. And when we do that, we can have resilience on all fronts, from a physical, mental, social, and emotional perspective. Again, even something simple as eating a healthy meal and exercising more can obviously contribute to your stamina, to more energy, to more feeling good. But we also want to focus on our emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being as well. So for teens, these are some things that are from the American Psychological Association. They need to lean on people as well. They're dealing with a lot just being teenagers, much less with COVID, much less with everything else that's going on in the world at this time. But they want to lean on other people that are their teachers and their classmates, and find support and find opportunities to deal with their skills and their talents, and to use those in all situations. And parents also have to have self-care, so they can teach their teens about self-care. So if we applied all of this to the paralyzed man, and as we wrap up here, the paralyzed man was, from a biological perspective, obviously he was paralyzed. From a psychological perspective, he could have been depressed, or at least feeling depleted. From a social perspective, he had no one to help him. From a spiritual perspective, Christ told him to go and sin no more. And so Jesus was able to heal him from that biopsychosocial model, even before that biopsychosocial model became a model. So that model came in 1977. Jesus was 2,000 years before that, and still kind of applied that model to fix and to heal all parts of him. And so when we look at our students, we want to look at all parts of them. And so even in areas where they don't feel like they're in control, we want to create a personal vision and help them to do that, and help them to problem solve, and help them to be competent socially, to be proactive, and to be flexible. And there's some wonderful verses. I just listed a few here for things that you can use with them. I can send you this link, or you can take a screenshot of this. But there's some great verses that we're not left alone in times of difficulty. We do have a sense of encouragement through the Bible, through our difficulties, and through our stressors. And we want to make sure that we kind of lean on the Bible and those things as well. You can also turn to different mental health professionals. We all work together, but we have different degrees and different training levels. Psychologists mostly do assessments, interpretation of mental health issues and personality issues, and they can prescribe in a few states, but not in all states. They mostly deal with therapy as well. Psychiatrists mostly deal with prescriptions and giving medication for the disorders we talked about today. Counselors and social workers help to deal with resources and with therapy as well. So they're similar kind of to psychologists, but psychologists do more assessments at the doctoral level. Here are some resources for you if you would like to take another screenshot of that. And my contact information there again is at the bottom. That pretty much wraps it up. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you as well. Or again, you can send to the contact information there at the bottom, or that's right here. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agaibi.
Thank you.
It's been a very, very deep and precious and informative presentation.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate your help, and I'm sure when we are going to face something in specific, you will find people reaching out to you and asking for your help and your advice and your counsel. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Of course.
We really appreciate your presentation, and we appreciate that we can contact you and get special advice when there's a situation that we might face or might get our way during our service. Thank you so much.
Thank
God
you.
bless you and be with you.
Thank you.
Abuna is also with us here.
Yes, Abuna, how are you?
Hi, Abuna. Habib.
I'm sorry because I had a servant meeting at the other church, that's why I didn't with you from the beginning. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
okay.
want to
How are you, doctor? How are you, doctor?
I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you so much, Ya Habib. Any other comments? Anyone? It's good that we can be assured that we can reach Dr. Agaibi, which is very assuring.
Yes, please reach out anytime.
Yeah,
My contact
okay.
info is there. You can, on the website, there's a phone number, and then you can reach me by email as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Of course, of course.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming and sharing and joining us. God bless you all. Finally, let us pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus, our Lord, thine the kingdom, power, and glory forever. Now may the love of God, of the Father, grace of the only begotten Son, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, fellowship, communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Be in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you all. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Abuna.
Thank you, Abuna.
Take care. Take care.
Thank you, Abuna.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, doctor. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Very
Abuna.
much.